Let's take a look at Wilbur's. So, I kind of like the idea to the start that you have here, with having your logo elements at the bottom and kind of information at the top. But as you can see, that kind of creates sort of a tricky layout for you, right? I kind of like how you have the headline here, info, and then kind of bookended by this secondary line. We need to have this contact information much bigger. That's one of the more important parts for this piece, right? Having the legal tucked in the bottom corner works. Um, so you can see by blocking these things out, you can kind of get a sense of positive negative space here. I might, if you want to have things kind of like bottom weighted, I might kind of try to build yourself, again, this is all give or take. Bottom, these are all kind of like a give or take sort of thing. You can even make these a little bit bigger if you wanted to. Bring these up above rates reserved, even if you wanted to have them all the same size. And then you can kind of block out a headline. And then if you wanted to have, your other block of text here, give or take, again, if you wanted to have your headline a little bit bigger, you kind of have, you're blocking yourself out more space. So if you wanted to have, the information here, and then what I would say is to have the contact information, give or take here-ish, larger, um, so that people can really read and see that contact information. And then even if you wanted to have the help the world see this Halloween, you might need to, reorganize it a little bit. Even swapping locations of these guys. So it gives yourself a little bit more room for that other tagline. But I think, having things bottom weighted isn't necessarily a bad idea. I think it's just kind of like rearranging, you know, um, and then sort of resetting some of this type. It's really the big thing is, I'm gonna cut these. The big thing is, getting this information more visible. I think this top part isn't bad by any means. Again, if you want to make your headline a bit bigger, and then you could kind of keep this how you sort of have it. Maybe make these a little bit smaller, like how you have it broken up, is what I'm trying to say. So if you had these broken up the way you had them broken up, put a return in there like you do, make these a bit smaller, even center justify it to fit that space, give or take here, and then you have all of this sort of square space to fit basically this line and this line, but to make that contact information really, really pop. I feel like you could have a good layout there. Okay. Check out Ivory's here. Um, Again, a really good start. I like the idea of having this sort of half, half and half kind of thing. But as you can see, I'm going to repaste these. Um, it's a good idea. Sorry, I'm like talking and arranging at the same time. It's difficult for me. So you can see like this sets up kind of like a tough spot to fit all of this info, right? So what you could do again is kind of, if you wanted to give yourself, that kind of space, um, make that logo a bit smaller and then have your headline across the whole top, giving yourself a little bit of room, but you could kind of have that logo and the headline here, and then this frees up, it doesn't look like much here, but it frees up a ton of space, right? And then you could definitely make these guys a little bit smaller. Um, again, kind of, I keep saying again, um, have these guys maybe across the bottom, give or take. And then you see you still have all of the space for your info, right? So even if you had, bringing this line out in one line, and then you could have from basically scare to afford it, even this size, and have it kind of in the middle here, and then have your important contact information larger in this area, and then have your tagline. So basically, if you had something to the effect of, you know, tagline, essentially tagline. Oops. Block of text, contact info. You know, if you sort of kind of visually think about it that way, right? Again, sort of having the logo here, main logo on the left, logos on the bottom, headline across the top, and then that really kind of frees up this nice, you can obviously see this, but that really kind of frees up this nice sort of square area to put all of this information and rearrange it and size it. You know, size it to where it looks that the party invitation thing, the when, what, where, all that fun stuff. But yeah, I think you have a solid start. I think it's just kind of rearranging some of these elements um, to potentially, I'm gonna copy this, um, to potentially just rearrange and give yourself, you know, that sort of square space to arrange the rest of your information. All right, going to Nina's. There we go. Paste all this just in case so I don't have to redraw it. So as you can see, I'm going to kind of pop these placeholders in. You have logo, give or take. Like you have logo, give or take, and then logos down across. Where's your other logo? Oh, there it is. Okay. Okay, good. All right, so I'm just gonna dump those guys. Oops. Like that. Put that down. Okay. So let's talk about your piece instead of me messing around already. That's good. Right, get rid of those. I like what you have here. I like how you sort of set yourself up. You know, you have this sort of right column, and then you set yourself up this sort of more traditional space, right? Um, there's a couple minor things I'll talk about with this. I think it's done pretty well. I think your text just needs a little bit of tweaks, but I'll show you this part first. So what I would do is that's 10 point. I might tuck this here or even here in the bottom left corner. We'll get to that in a second. Um, you know, and if you wanted to have your logos in this bottom area, you know, obviously they have to be much smaller. But if you wanted to kind of have that look that you had, moving this to the left gives you a little bit more room for that. Obviously, you'd have to play around with this to make these a little bit more visually even instead of just shapes, but just kind of quickly, blocking this out quickly. You know, giving those, you know, sort of equal visual space, right? But again, setting up that right hand column would be great. Um, Here, again, I would make this 10 point, this is legal. I believe I talked about it earlier, and then just set your baseline shift, which we've done in previous assignments. I just kind of arbitrarily did it. So that way it stays. I know it's kind of didn't mention it, it's kind of tricky. Anyway, so I like what you have here with your headline. I might move it up just a little bit, get these up just a little bit. I like this, you know, the spacer you have. I like how you kind of have this sub headline. These are the parts where I think we could use a little bit of work, nothing crazy. I honestly might make these much smaller, um, even if we went down to 14, and that gives you room to move both of these up a bit, and then help the world see this Halloween. I might even put across the bottom here, so you have this like nice sort of bookend here. And then you can make this much bigger. So, you know, reformatting this, give or take, you know, I've done this on a couple, but, uh, you know, give or take something like that. And you can even have these lines be smaller. Oops, let's put that on one line. You can even have the, you know, the basic info lines smaller and then have your, even go, I might get rid of the punctuation there. go up to 18 with this one. Actually, we'll do 20 on both of these guys. You'll have to play around and sort of format the text a little bit so it's not so snug. Um, but again, you get the sort of the general idea there. So now you see with these even being bigger, even if you wanted to go bold, if there is a bold for this option, there isn't, but if you wanted to go bolder with these two or even a little bit bigger, just get that, party invitation thing going where we have, you know, here's the who, the what, we know it's Halloween, um, info, even if you made this a tiny bit smaller, even 12 point to give it a little bit more breathing room, or to even make this a little bit bigger, center it all to itself. You have this visual element now, right, to where it looks, obviously tightened up a little bit more than I did, but, you know, most of yours is just going to be reformatting this a little bit and then kind of reformatting these logos if you want to have it this way, or if you want to try it with the lens graphics on the bottom, et cetera, et cetera. But I think you've set yourself up for a really good start there. All right, Nina. So that was Nina. Whoops. This is, there we go. We have Daunte's. All right, so I'm going to paste my squares here. Okay, so here's your logos, give or take. So again, I think you have a decent setup. I think there could be some relatively minor tweaks, somewhat similar to this actually, but I like the border that you have. I like generally what you've done. For you, I might have this be a tiny bit smaller, and then that gives you room to have your text. I would format it, obviously. I would avoid using text boxes in this case and just kind of have, so you don't have to worry about this. So you kind of have everything separate, but, reformat it obviously, but this gives you room to have, larger headline where your logos are here. So even if you wanted to have that, similar setup with your logos, you already have a pretty good start there. So kind of have that, give or take across the bottom like you had. I think for you, again, it's going to be breaking up this text, right? So even if you kind of had that 10th annual site night, help the world save, kind of bookendish sort of thing, obviously tweak it. So you could have 10th annual site night, copy of text, and then your contact information much larger there. I think some relatively minor. It's really going to be taking these out. And what I would do for you, again, for layouts like this and Illustrator specifically, I just cut that and then I'm pasting it. So now it's by itself on one line instead of in an area type box. And then kind of like as I'm deciding how to break up text, I'm literally just kind of like breaking it apart there. This is the kind of pain in the butt part where it gives you, you could potentially put this in an area type, but generally I kind of like to break it up by hand, so to speak. Um, but you'll find, you can make this much smaller, less bold, and you can find you could probably fit that give or take in this area here. And then this way you have, you know, like I said, sort of separate elements rather than in text boxes, so you don't get stuck inside one box. So now you have like these elements that you can use separately and lay out a little bit separately if you wanted to just move them around a little bit. But I tend to like physically, oops, I forgot to paste the number, but you get the idea. I kind of like literally like to break it apart and kind of see, if you wanted to fit this in here, where your return is going to be, make that a lot smaller. Give or take where your return is going to be here. You kind of have to like, in air quotes, hand do it. and you'll need to watch. Anyway, I won't do the whole thing, but you get the general idea. You kind of have to like hand do it, but for me, pardon my dogs, for me, I feel like it gives you like a little bit more flexibility rather than using area type in this case. Not all cases, but in this case. But again, I think a pretty solid start. Again, just kind of reformatting the headline, reformatting where you might have some of your information, and I think you could have a great revision. All right, we'll do Joshua Taylor's. All right, so here we're going to kind of run into similar, I believe, like Ivory's. Yeah, so similar situation like Ivory's. I like the start that you have, but you can see, let's go back to yours. You can see it, it kind of sets up for a hard spot, right, to have this be less than half in this case. I'll highlight this so we can see, like, so here's your logos. It's very, very logo heavy. You have kind of a headline, but then all the information kind of gets lost and buried, right? This is only 14 point. We want to make sure actually that our size is correct. Oops, that's not what I wanted to do. Yeah, so our size is incorrect as well, 9 by 9. We want to make sure that we're using the correct size, right? We'll go back to Nina's here. 7 3/4 by 6, right? So that's going to be one of the problems. We want to make sure that we're using the right size, right? So width is 7 3/4 by 6. Then you could still kind of have this again, like I keep going back to Ivory's, but move that aside. You could kind of have the idea, just blocking this out here. Okay, you kind of have, the idea of sort of setting up a left and right. But what I would do is kind of, if you wanted to have that idea of sort of a left and a right side, kind of have your logos. Again, you'll have to sort of visually check these so that they're pretty much the same size, at least visually anyway. You might need to nudge that one up a little bit. You kind of have to split the difference between like, it's not going to align perfectly. And for me, that's problematic. But even still, even this, like with your logos here, this gives you a lot more room for your information, right? So if you had your headline, I might bring that down. So this is one line. Again, we can make this much smaller and then play with our baseline shift like we did with the bike logo. Again, that's just like breaking this up really quickly, but if you wanted to have it broken up slightly differently, that's totally fine. But you can kind of see this gives you, space for your headline, and then it gives you space to be able to break up your information. If you wanted to tuck this in the bottom corner, that works. If you wanted to have, 10th annual site night, again, I'm kind of using this as sort of like the template, but you could arrange it a little bit differently. But again, information, contact info large, and you could have your help the world see this Halloween tagline down at the bottom. But this way you could sort of have contact info, your basic info. It gives you sort of that room to break those up. And even if you wanted to have this line, let's say in between the basic info and the content info, it's not going to look as clunky, obviously, because it's not just literal boxes. But again, if we start to sort of break this up, I kind of tend to decide where I want to break my information up, right? So scare up to afford it, cut that, paste that. So now you kind of get a general idea of, and then information, and then, oh yeah, you need that other secondary line that's in there to help the world see this Halloween down at the bottom there, or wherever you put it. But then you sort of start to already kind of see a visual for how these might break up. And again, you might need to fix some of your, sorry, I'm talking and doing it at the same time. You might have to reset your text just a little bit, watch where your returns are, all that fun stuff. But it sort of gives you a general idea. Now you sort of can see how this is, broken up and how you can arrange it. Um, if you want to make that a little bit smaller, if you want to make this a little bit bigger, it kind of gives you that flexibility, right? Um, to be able to play around with these. So for this, like give or take formatting, again, this is really loose. So you'll have to tweak it and clean it up, but you get the sort of general idea. For your information, I think that you have a decent start with that. What I might do is have, again, visit, and then our also free. And then this way, again, you'll have to play with your formatting just a little bit, but your line spacing, et cetera, et cetera. But you can see it sort of gives you, again, if you wanted to have that there, you have to clean it up a bit, and then you help the world see here. Even if you want to make that contact information a little bit bigger, or it gives you room to play around with. If we move this all down just a little bit, it gives you more room to play around with this. If you wanted to have your headline, obviously, again, reformatting it. If you wanted to have this much smaller, and then, well, maybe not so much, but if you wanted to have trick or treat, there you go. If you wanted to have, oops, I lost a letter. If you wanted to have trick or treat a little bit bigger, you'll get the general idea, or you get the idea. But this gives you room to sort of like play around with your headline, stylize that headline a little bit more, and then kind of like stylize these a little bit. Even if you wanted to go with the bold here, definitely bold on the contact info. And then, like I said, with line spacing, all that stuff is within character. So you can kind of choose your line spacing there. Oops, as I accidentally messed it up. So if you wanted to adjust, oops, if you wanted to adjust your line spacing there, and then this is where it gets a little bit tricky. Oh, it's gonna let us do that. Yeah, well, okay, good. And you can kind of, if you wanted to have this be a little bit wider, you can. If you wanted to make that a little bit, but anyway, you get the general idea. You kind of split the difference, um, just so stuff isn't crashing into each other. But you can stylize it a little bit more. But having it sort of set up like this with it on the left side rather than on the right side, um, rather than having that right side so tight, give yourself a lot more space to be able to rearrange your text. I think you had a great start. Um, but I think giving yourself, a lot more space on the right side is gonna benefit your design. All right, going to Laney's. So here we go. So for you, I think you've got an awesome start. I like the idea of your trick or treat for a cause. You might even be able to make this a little bit bigger. I might stylize this a little bit more, rather than, I believe that's aerial round. Maybe give it a little bit more. You can personality. You can kind of get away with that with a headline. Definitely make that R a bit smaller and play around with your baseline shift. Even if you wanted to make trick or treat larger and for a cause, and then sight night larger, you kind of have this nice even arch going on. Definitely make this a little bit bigger. Bring it up a little bit here. That gives you. Oops. Let's go back to Where is it? Here, we'll go back to Josh's and I'll grab these guys. Handy blocking. There we go. But yeah, I think that you have a really good setup so far. Just kind of moving these elements out of the way. With this headline, the way you have it set up, I think you could, again, making this a little bit bigger, stylizing trick or treat and site night a little bit, depending on how much space you have moving this up. But if you had your headline, and you basically have your headline here, right? So if you had your headline kind of in this area still, which is great. And then I don't think I really need to block this out, but make sure that you're not, my rectangle might not be super accurate, but just make sure that we're not squishing our logos. You can kind of get this out of the corner a little bit if you bump it over like 2 or 3 clicks, 2 or 3 clicks to the right, 2 or 3 clicks up, just so it doesn't get cut off potentially. But then again, it gives you this, you know, it gives you this decent area for your logos, right? Again, to sort of make them relatively visually even. You could even bring your logos, way down depending on where you wanted to align them. Um, and then that frees up all of this space, right? So again, for you, I think it's breaking up this block of text, right? And you can kind of think about those important information pieces, right? And then don't forget there's that help the world see this. Oh, no, never mind. You got your help the world see. I covered it up. So if you wanted to have like, sort of tagline here, and then you could have block of general info and then block of contact info and really stylize that contact info. Um, really stylize that contact info. So if you had basically from scare to afford it in this space here, and then you have your contact info here, and you can kind of stylize it to where you have like the website and the number really large, and you have um, the text of, I don't know, I'll show you like Josh's similar. This is just one idea, but you could kind of have this, give or take, where you still have the fur information, but you have the number and website blam are nice and big. Again, I think you have a really great start. I like what you have with your headline. Um, just gonna cut this so it's out of the way. I like what you have with the headline. I think, some stylizing, some, really just kind of moving these around a little bit, moving these down, giving yourself this space to sort of break up this giant block of text and really separate that contact info. I think it's going to go a long way. All right, and then we'll go to Nathaniel's. I'll back out a little bit. I think I have an awesome start here. I think some sort of minor tweaks. I'll put my handy blocking in there. I like your idea of having your headline across the top. You might watch your spacing, clean it up a little bit. Even if you wanted to do, sort of a trick or treat, and then for a cause on smaller, and then site night a little bit bigger, maybe like this size. So you have this kind of like bookendy kind of thing going on. And we can make that R much smaller, and then raise it baseline shift, like in the motorcycle logo. If you have questions about it, we can certainly go over it. So again, like I like the way you have your headline set up. I'm going to block this out. Even if you lost a little bit of space, but give or take, I like how you have your headline here. Your logo, I like the placement of. I might, just slightly tweak. This is super accurate, but you get the sort of general idea. But this way you have a little bit of room to get it away from the edge, but you can put your legal down here, right? So that way it's not so cramped here. I would adjust your logos just a little bit, just so they're a little bit more visually even, but again, to sort of block it out. Now you kind of get the general idea. These are a bit smaller than your logos, but even if you have them a little bit smaller, sometimes if they're smaller and if they have more breathing room, they just look nicer, even though they're smaller. A lot of times clients don't know that you've made them smaller, to be honest. Wouldn't want to spread them out that one, maybe. But anyway, giving it a little bit more room sometimes goes longer than having logos bigger and tighter packed, right? So moving on to this, I think you have this blocked out really well. What I might do is go center justified on everything here with these ads. It's probably better to have consistency. And if you're center justifying on some of it, I would sort of center justify on all of it. But what I might do for you, you can kind of keep these separated if you like. Um, I would separate this kind of so you have the 10th annual site night. And then if you wanted to have your sort of two blocks of text, I would make them a bit smaller. But if you had, sort of your two blocks of text here, right? And then your other block here, I would make those much smaller so they take up less space. And then I think that your tagline works well here at the bottom. But then this gives you space when it's blocky like this, it's trickier, but this gives you space to sort of stylize this a little bit. I like your for information and free collection kit. I would have these two on one line. So that's one line, making that line font size much smaller, and then have site night on its own, and then or call toll free at have that on its own. But basically, you could have that contact info, pretty much set up how you have it, but some minor tweaks. But in this area here, I think it's just kind of yours is going to be this kind of reorganization. I'll move this over. The sort of reorganization of this area, right? It looks chunky when you have it in blocks like this, but I think you're super close. I think just kind of like, even if you wanted to make this all center justified and that sort of one block here, that's totally fine. Um, even if you could try having this bigger, if it doesn't work, not, kind of bookend it like these. Um, if you don't like that, that's totally fine. Um, but I would say make this block much smaller, and then that gives you room to make the contact block a little bit bigger. But I think you have an awesome start. All right, then Tristan's here. So someone else did a center justified one. And you can see it's super tricky, right? Um, if we start to block these things out, um, if you wanted to try to make a center heavy one, I would make these logos much smaller and see if you could kind of fit, give or take visually, depending, they might have to be much smaller. You might not want them this small, or even have them, if you wanted to have them a bit larger, you could have your main logo, secondary logos line up, give or take. They don't have to be right on the dot, but anyway, I'm nitpicking my own blocking here. But if you had those down at the bottom, and then you don't need all of these. You don't need a legal for every one of them. Just a lens crafters one, right? You want to make sure that it's not being cut off. So yeah, you don't need one for each logo, just for the one logo. So depending on how you have it, even if you wanted to have, again, tucked in the bottom left or bottom right, give or take, this sort of sets up a space here for you to work. And then here, I might even make the main logo a little bit smaller if you want to go with sort of that center heavy design, and then give yourself headline across the top. Again, you'll have to tweak this a little bit, but headline across the top. And then that sort of gives you room here if you wanted to have, 10th annual site night, either in one or two lines here. And then you have your small block of text, or block of small text, I should say, give or take, formatted here. And I might center justify the text, but you do have a lot of space to work with. You don't want to clutter everything up, and it looks way cluttered when it's just boxes. But and then this gives you room over here for your contact information. The harder part with the contact information and having it split sort of into columns like this is going to be having that website and the phone number be large without being cut off. But if you wanted to have even, oops, something like this, and then have your help the world see this Halloween down here. And then that gives you this kind of room for setting up that text. Having it center justified is tricky. It's doable, but again, you'll kind of have to sort of set up those more, I don't know, traditional shapes, right? So if you had, again, center logo, but give yourself room at the top for your headline, and then logos down at the bottom, and then that gives you sort of more, it's very vertical, but it gives you sort of a more normal shape to work with, rectangular on the right, left, and then rectangular on the right, sort of give you those more sort of even spaces to work with. So I think you have a decent start. Again, I think it's going to be, those center justified ones are tricky, but if we're going to center justify, we can make these much smaller, um, much smaller down at the bottom to give yourself, room, again, room for that headline, room for the headline at the top, and then room for that smaller bit of text, and then room for that stylizing of the contact info. I think it definitely work. You can definitely make the middle justified, um, or middle design heavy, work. It's a bit tricky, but you can do it.